Our final paper today is undergraduate art history and sociology double major Maggie Discher. Food services at the South Carolina State Hospital, food revealing shifts in culture. Maggie.
My work began with the small bakery building that stands in the shadows of the Babcock Building on Doom Street. After exploring its quirks and deciphering parts of its history, another narrative emerged that paralleled many of the social perceptions of the notoriously difficult field of mental health. Eventually, these findings traced the complexities of society, technology, and management that were each tied up in the analysis of mental illness. These factors evidence that the food services on the campus have gone through a number of changes that not only reflect the specific circumstances of the hospital, but have also been subjected to the wider changing trends in the perceptions and care of the insane. Food services at the hospital were originally located in the Mills Building. As mentioned earlier, the Mills Building was constructed in the 1820s to house the state's new mental health hospital. It was an innovative building intended for a forward-thinking role of the care of the mentally ill, and with its innovative purpose came other advancements, such as central heating and extensive fireproofing. The kitchens, located on the ground floor, served the small population over the next few decades as it began to grow across the campus. As the population steadily increased, the administration initiated new building campaigns so that the patients could have comfortable and rejuvenating living conditions and amenities. Likewise, the food services needed to be shifted to meet this new, grander vision of the hospital. The completion of the wards in the Babcock Building in the second half of the century created space not only for patients but also for a new kitchen. This helped relieve many of the stresses on the food production, though it was not comprehensive, as the main ovens were left attached to the Mills Building. So, in compliance with the expansion, a separate bakery was constructed in 1900. It was a small building placed just behind the ward and administrative Babcock Building. According to the style repeatedly used in this strain of the building campaign, the bakery is a small, symmetrical, washed brick structure. Its abstracted classical details come together in a central bay with two flanking wings, giving it a defined and rather welcoming entrance. In the shadow of the massive and more elaborately designed Babcock Building, called the New Asylum at the time, the bakery sits facing Doom Street, perpendicular to the back of the Babcock Building. It's placed among other, more utilitarian buildings, like the laundry, maintenance structures, and vegetable storage, each with its own distinct and vital service to the campus. Among its neighbors, the bakery aesthetically appears to be the most closely related to the laundry. While they both display similar design features, they also seem to show some reception beyond the everyday staff. Likewise, each of these buildings is oriented to face Doom Street, a feature that deters people from using non-planned paths and roads beyond roads and sidewalks and maintains a certain level of control in the patients' and staff's experience on the campus. Beyond this feature's desired control, it's also functional. Since both of these buildings took in and put out supplies from all over the campus, large utility transportation vehicles needed easy access to each of the buildings. According to its functional relationship to the street, the design of the bakery becomes even more efficient in its plan. The three bays of the building are set up to create a procession of grain into bread and eventually to the consumer. The grain arrives from the farming and dairy operations in the east to be stored in the eastern storeroom. It moves to the central portion of the bay equipped with a large modern ovens to be mixed and baked. The finished product moves to the western portion of the building to be stored where the bread is ready for transport. And the bread finally makes its way to the top of the hill to be distributed in the dining facilities. The bakery functioned very well within the more massive hospital system. A well-organized mechanistic system allowed the campus to operate smoothly and efficiently, marking its advancement toward self-sufficiency. The mechanization of campus, for the sake of independent operation, served a number of purposes. Primarily, smooth operations were imperative just to serve the hospital's large campus and constantly growing population. But this idea of self-sufficiency would evolve even further to create meaning among both the patients and outside community. As theories on the treatment of mentally ill were continually evolving, the idea of the rehabilitative powers of merely keeping the patients comfortable remained fairly constant. So, for patients to be at ease and have a fuller grasp on their surroundings, it was very beneficial for the asylum to act as its own unit. Patients could effectively live in their own town that provided for all of their needs. Site sustainability almost invariably creates some degree of isolation. But isolation can be dangerous in the mindset of the popularly negative outlook on the history of the mental health field and its implied mistreatment and poor conditions. Cast as the bad guys by popular culture in many historians' accounts, the administration becomes the manipulators, and isolation becomes their primary tool for getting away with neglect. However, by this interpretation, intent is often overlooked. While isolation certainly implies more or disproportionate control, control is necessary to ensure the patient's safety. Isolation helps the patient's well-being in many respects. Although they may be isolated as a group, they are saved from the personal isolation and helplessness they would have experienced within wider society. Clearly, this intention of a fresh start in an aware environment was meant to be rehabilitative rather than dehumanizing. Going even further to incorporate the patients into their hospital environment, many were employed in the handiwork and skilled tasks all over the campus. This policy also serves to better facilitate the self-sufficiency of the site. Not only was the production on site, but so were many of the workers involved in its various processes. There are records of patients working in the bakery from shortly after its construction into the middle of the century. Beyond the bakery, patients completed skilled and labor-intensive work on the farms, dairy, kitchens, and cafeterias. Their hard work helped identify them with both the landscape and the procedure of the hospital system. The main hindrance to these theoretical rehabilitation efforts was in the insufficient funds given to the unceasingly growing population. So, to ensure that enough food was being produced for the growing numbers at the site, an addition was made behind the bakery to accommodate more storage needs in 1927. This fell at a time when the superintendents were annually reporting that the facilities were becoming unsuited for the ever-expanding number of patients. Accordingly, even these small curative additions allotted for would quickly be outgrown. The distress voiced in these reports marks a stark fear for the future of the treatment methods and true rehabilitation possible for these patients. Although the bakery was a vital and productive operation for 50 years, throughout nearly its entire lifespan, the population was growing too quickly for the facilities to keep up. To add to the predicament, annual reports were simultaneously citing staffing shortages. Alongside these logistical issues, there is a collusion of other factors in the 1950s that introduced the next radical change in the food services operations. At this time, the hospital had extended to the opening of the new State Park campus, effectively expanding the institution's presence in the community. Correspondingly, the middle of the century also saw a good bit of social change. Medicine was improving, especially in the biology and pharmaceuticals of psychiatry. Awareness on the treatment of the mental health patients was spreading, and the ever-progressing technology of the era no longer allowed the site to be so self-sufficient as to be closed off from the rest of Columbia. Self-sufficiency was now torn between functionality and a new call for transparency among the increasingly concerned outside public. In an effort to compromise these two, a huge, new, widely publicized building campaign produced a modern $1 million kitchen, bakery, cafeteria. It was designed to serve millions of meals a year to both campuses, promise healthful and diverse meal offerings, and provide a clean, open, ultra-modern environment for the patients to benefit from. This new building was seated perpendicular to Doom Street, at the bottom of the hill that leads away from the Babcock Building. It was situated so that the old utility section of Doom Street had evolved into a procession toward its successor. The food services building no longer had the abstracted classical details or the announced entrance. Rather, its most prominent features included a facade of loading docks set into a very streamlined geometric building. It welcomed a new age with a transparent, forward-looking plan. This design distanced themselves from previous eras that were characterized by fewer advancements, and viewed patients with a promising new point of view. It encouraged good treatment and held on to a hope for cures. Food processes in general had gone through a massive transformation at the time. The machine had guaranteed that mass-produced food was becoming the standard. Meals were quick, efficient, and had a far longer shelf life with industrial refrigeration. The modern design of the building emphasized a marriage between honesty and technology. Since the goal of the building was to create a rather all-inclusive food facility, the idea of a machine was conceived of on a new level. The entire microsystem of the food services was distinct within the macrosystem of the hospital as a whole. For such systems to operate efficiently, very strict operational guidelines needed to be followed carefully. This meant that fewer patients were working in the facility than had been previously working in food production. These patients were not eliminated from campus work, but they were performing fewer skilled or specialized tasks and relegated instead to duties like serving food and cleaning. Despite a diminished number of patients working to produce food, the daily tasks and work of the patients became even more vital. As society was growing more aware of the mentally ill, it became more important for patients to be linked back to outside society and the humanity that many believed they were being deprived of. One of the most common methods of accomplishing this goal was by encouraging patients to learn tasks and job skills that could facilitate a transition back into wider society. In some instances, patients were even employed outside of the campus. This practice was beneficial not only in promoting effective patients and active treatment methods, but also in hopes of relieving population stresses. When patients could more easily adapt to life beyond the campus, the hospital could have greater resources to devote to a smaller number of patients. These practices moved the hospital beyond the strictly controlled, self-sufficient campus that was fought so hard to maintain earlier in the century. Although this may have lost the administration some of its control, these methods were more appropriate for the times. It was not as necessary for the patients to be so removed from society as the social stigmas changed. As technology changed, these buildings have undergone a number of adaptations to suit their needs and functions. While the Mills Building's big name and historic story ensured its continued use as an administrative building and as the only one of the food services buildings still employed today, the bakery underwent some functional changes in its later years. No longer necessary as a bakery, and sometime after the new food services facility was built, the building was affixed with the title Rehabilitation Shop. Possibly around the same time, the bread storage section of the building was painted white and given awnings over its doorways. The motivation behind these changes and what exactly a rehabilitation shop would have entailed remains to be a mystery of my work, though it was very likely that this new function was closely related to the maintenance sector surrounding it. This new facade treatment meant that the western wing was now drastically differentiated from the rest of its body and appears to have greeted a wider audience than perhaps the rest of the building. It likely adapted to meet smaller production needs that were brought about by the technological revamping of the hospital in the middle of the century. In comparison, the new facility continued to produce food services for the campus until the end of the Columbia unit, experiencing far less adaptation than the older buildings. The small business of food services at the South Carolina State Hospital opened the door to a wider network of more complex social concerns. In a field so intrinsically rooted in idealism, evolving medicine and technology, and an ever-changing relationship with society, it became very sensitive to a wide variety of factors. Looking at food services takes multiple perspectives into account, along with the tedium of processes that would normally be inaccessible to the wider public. This perspective reveals the hope and promise that was meant to be intrinsic in the field, but was spoiled by resource conflict and the opposition inherent between the ideals within the campus and outside of it. Food services offer a unique look at mental health. It reveals a history that has not been sensationalized or suppressed, but rather one that is fundamental to its central functioning and the provisions for basic needs. In this light, the story is not a drama, but merely an idealistically conceived notion that often fell short because of outside forces. Thank you.